Today, we're very fortunate to be welcoming Bob Goldstein flew in from San Francisco. His arms are very tired to be here. And he's the class of 1990. Also, we're really happy to have part of his family here, Christine Goldstein, who is an NYU law graduate. And they were in law school together. He was at Brooklyn, and she was at NYU, and I think a year ahead. So no wonder Bob did so well with all those notes from Christine. And Jessica is currently working here. Jessica, right there in the first row, is working at Sotheby's and has a great position there. So we're glad to see the whole family here. This is a real treat and it's very timely. Bob is a pioneer, a leader in the field of finance, in social enterprise work in a sense, but he is very much focused on impact investment. And the company that he is now running is Sonnen, and the way to remember that name, he told me, Sonnen Capital, is that the first part, SO, stands for social, the N stands for and, or ampersand, Sonnen, and then N stands for environmental. So if you put those three things together, it tells you a lot about what you're going to hear about, but the idea is that investment for, business purpose, investment for business purposes, and also for socially desirable outcomes like environmental improvement, attacking climate change, and so on. See, this is one of the great advantages of being a dean. You know, you hiccup and everybody starts moving here, but thank you very much, Dasha.
I thought that was for me.
No, that's gin. The water's for you. Thank you very much. And so we're really glad to be able to hear about generating financial returns that have lasting and social environmental impact. And more about that in a moment. But first, a little background. Bob was the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of RCM Capital Management. For years, it's now known as the Alliance Global Investors. I can tell you, having recently, while I'm compiling my annual tax and looking at my retirement accounts, I'm extremely grateful for your success.
Left long ago.
But it's okay. The impact is lasting, and while you were there, RCM was a global investment management firm with over $125 billion in assets under management, and they were both in the institutional retail markets. He joined the company in 1997, and in 2010 transitioned from being a general counsel COO role when he was then named as Chief Executive Officer. So this is not an unusual experience for many of our very successful alumni to, as you had, have training and work in a law firm, but also to be in the finance of the corporate sphere and then move from general counsel to the CEO position. We recently had Bob Mann here in another field, a technology field, and it was a career path we were familiar with here at this law school. Prior to RCM, Bob was an associate at Weil, Gotshal & Manges, and really just terrible places to work. He was in the New York office, the London office, and the Prague office. Prague is fantastic. Did you found the Prague office? Oh, okay. He focused on mergers and acquisitions, corporate transactions, and investment management matters. Now, while he was a student at Brooklyn Law School, he was very distinguished. He won awards, including the Mead Data Central Award for Excellence in Research and Writing. Legal writing remains important, and I think very much a part of the exceptional experience at Brooklyn Law School. And also he won the American Jurisprudence Award in Federal Securities Regulations, Corporations, and Secured Transactions. He was a member of the Brooklyn Law Review as well. So we're going to talk more about social impact, but we're also here today with two leaders in the field who have the #1 book, business book on Amazon that's just been launched, Professor Dana Brackman-Reeser and their co-author, Vice Dean Stephen Dean, and they're both here. Stephen Dean's in the front, Dana's there. And we're very excited to have them here to participate in this session in a field that if they did not found it, they certainly helped midwife it and nurture it to its present robust state. So, I'll begin with some questions, and eventually we'll open it up. But Bob, just let's start off with a self-serving question. What did you take away from your experience at Brooklyn Law School that served you well in your fantastic career?
First of all, thanks, Dean Allard, and for having me here, and everybody. There's free food, so I know that's always an attraction for students. When I was a kid, if there was free food, I was there. So, but anyway, thanks for having me here, and it's a pleasure. I haven't been back here since I graduated, so that's, gosh, coming on 30 years. So the place is very different. But in terms of my law school education and how that's helped me, I did, full disclosure, I did see the questions beforehand. So I had some time to think about it. And it was, yeah, right. I can think, one of them is it taught me to think on my feet.
We'll see.
So I think two things really stick with me. And one is writing. I'm a stickler. Anybody that works with me, they can attest to it. My daughter could probably attest to it too, that I am a fanatic when it comes to writing. And I think being able to articulate yourself in a very cohesive, linear, articulate way in writing is extremely important for a successful career. It's probably changed a little bit since the earlier days of my career. Everything's kind of gone a little digital, and everything's 140 characters and all that sort of stuff. But I still believe, at least in terms of what helped me progress in my career, was just being very focused on writing. And then it wasn't any one class, it wasn't any one professor. It was kind of a holistic experience. And along with that came the idea, I'm kind of a linear thinker as opposed to a fragmented thinker. But what I found was, we
have so much in common.
Yeah, but being in law school, right, you're always in the gray area. Right? If everything was black and white, there'd be no reason for any of us. So you're always dealing in the grays. And what it allowed me to do, or what it taught me to do, was to become more of a fragmented thinker or a non-linear thinker, that to be a critical thinker, there's not always one solution or one way to look at an issue or a problem, and that you should attack it from multiple angles until eventually you come up with what you think is the best solution. It may not be the best solution, but so long as you think it's the best solution, you just go with it. So I would say, one, the writing aspect of it was very helpful, but just critically thinking and not necessarily being so linear, A to B to C, but it could be fragmented and attacking things from multiple perspectives and multiple angles. I think law school is really good at helping me think that way, and definitely helped me in my career.
So writing, very important, and looking at things from different angles and different pieces and maybe different directions simultaneously. So did you work hard in law school?
I actually did. There's probably a worn-out desk somewhere in the basement with my name scratched somewhere in it. No, I was one of the other questions you were supposed to ask me.
You see, I know you're nervous. He's trying to take over. No, I got a question for you right here. No, don't worry about that. We'll get to those. So, this is a question you can hit out of the ballpark.
I was about to answer that question.
Right, okay, here we go. So, you went from law school to Weil Gotshal, right? Now, you and I are in an era where big firm practice, we talk a lot about mentors today, but our era, we're very much of the time period when we felt that mentor was 2/3 of the word tormentor. What was your experience like at a big law firm then, and how were you prepared for that? You're blushing a little bit.
Well, because I got a great story. I don't know how much time we have, but it involves Dennis Block, who I know is a big benefactor to the law school.
Having breakfast with him tomorrow morning, that's one reason I asked you. Yeah, I am.
Okay, so he won't remember me. But I remember him extremely well.
He will after tomorrow. So.
Yeah. It was a tough place to work, long hours. But it's something, you know, when you're in the middle of it, you're kind of like, geez, why am I doing this? But afterwards, you look back on it and you think that was one of the greatest experiences of my life. How much you learn, how much discipline you learn, again, how to think. Again, it just takes you to another level. But I'll just tell this really quick story. I was working, I was a young associate there, maybe 1 or 2 years out of law school, and there was this large merger that Dennis Block was running. It was at the time, it was 94, 95, so it was a $3 billion merger, very, very large for that period of time. And we were just working crazy hours all night and the like, and got home on a Friday night, about 10 or 11 o'clock, finally got home before midnight, before the next day anyway. And I got home, I crashed, went to bed. My phone rings at 6:30 in the morning. I jump out of bed. Gosh, who's calling me at 6:30 in the morning? I pick up the phone. I hear this booming voice. And there's clearly somebody on a speakerphone in a large conference room. I'm at work. Where are you? I'm in bed. See you in 30 minutes. That was Dennis Block.
Did you shower?
I did.
No, don't answer that question. That's your trying.
So I get up and get into the office, and he's there, full of energy, spring chicken, and I'm dying. And I look, and he's double my age at the time, and it was an experience. And you talk about mentor or tormentor, and I think it was kind of both, to be honest with you. But what I learned there was getting ahead is more than just smarts and ability. It's putting in the time and the hours, because there are a lot of people in this world that are smart and have ability. But what is it that gets you ahead? It's probably inspiration, perspiration, and the willingness to put in the time and the hours. And Dennis was an extremely hard.
Did you whine?
You don't whine in front of Dennis. It's just one of those.
Well, you don't whine generally.
I whine in front of my wife.
Successful people don't whine.
Yeah, no.
So you did something actually very interesting at Weil Gotshal, which was not typical. I mean, there was a conventional wisdom that you were serious about a law firm career, you would stay in the home office or in the major offices. And the other thing was that the world of law, practice of law, was nowhere near as global, seamlessly global. So you were a real pioneer. So you moved as an associate from New York to London, and from then London to Prague as the founding attorney in Prague. Talk about that. What went through your mind? Were you assigned to do this because you were successful? How did that all happen, and what did you get from that experience?
That wasn't on the list, by the way.
I think you can handle it.
Yeah. So my wife is working at another law firm, another competing law firm, and I can't remember the order of it. She may have come home with the opportunity to go to her law firm, which already had a London office, and you want to move to London. And we didn't have a London office at the time, and I went, I don't know who I went to. I think it was Ira Milstein maybe, or Todd Lang, and said, I want to go to London. And unbeknownst to me, they were already thinking about, plans were in motion to do that. So they said, aha, we got someone. And so that's how it started. And I went to London, and then this is right a couple of years after, the Velvet Revolution, right? So you've got what is now the Czech Republic and Hungary and Poland are opening up. They're developing into a market-based economy. And while Gotshal saw the opportunity to keep moving east into Warsaw, into Budapest, into Prague, they wanted someone to go to Prague, and I raised my hand because why wouldn't you go to Prague? It's a spectacular city, and it was an opportunity to distinguish yourself. It's a large law firm, and maybe to stick yourself out, make yourself known a little bit, do something a little bit different. So that's why I went.
Well, you just glossed over that, but that's very important. Even within a large organization, you found a way to distinguish yourself and have a willingness to try something really new. I mean, did you ever think, well, what if it doesn't work out?
Of course. If it didn't work out, I'd come back to New York and become another cog in the wheel at Weil Gotshal. But that wasn't in the plan. The plan was to make it work.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I think that reaction is particularly instructive and useful. So you did come back, and you eventually transitioned into business or finance, really. Can you talk about that a little bit. How did that opportunity present itself, and what went through your mind about using, your background, your career, your law degree, but in really in a new role?
Sure. So when I came back from Prague, back to the New York, I came back from Prague to the New York office at Walgotschel, and they were starting up a new practice. At the time, it was called private equity, but really it was hedge fund. And private equity is a completely different concept today. But, PE and VC is a whole other world. But at the time, so nascent, it was hedge funds. It was called private equity, and we had Michael. Many people here probably wouldn't know them, but Michael Steinhardt and Leon Cooperman, who were the fathers of hedge fund, and they had them as clients. So when I came back, I started up in that practice with another partner. They were just getting going. And I started focusing on alternative investment, in the alternative investment space, which was still pretty new. Did that for about a year, and I got a call from a recruiter that this money manager out in San Francisco, RCM Capital Management, which was a fairly well-established organization. This is late 90s, mid-96. And they wanted to start up. They did traditional investing. They had traditional investing, long only, mutual funds and the like, but they saw the opportunity to get into the hedge fund world. And they knew I was doing hedge fund work, so I got a call from a recruiter, do you want to move out to San Francisco, start up, go in as counsel, but work in their hedge fund practice that they're going to start? Sure. Sounds like a pretty cool idea to me, move to San Francisco and do that. Interestingly, I got there, and that is when the tech bubble just took off, like a rocket. And the RCM was very heavy in high beta tech stocks. And so the company was doing phenomenally well, and management decided, what the hell do we need hedge funds for? We're doing great with just owning tech stocks. So actually, they never started it. So I just kind of toiled along in the legal department. And then the firm grew so quickly, but they weren't hiring. Basically what happened, and this is a good lesson for people, is that people needed help in other areas of the business, and I noticed it, so I would just say, well, why don't I help? So for instance, somebody on the trading desk, there was an issue on the trading desk, they didn't know who to turn to. So I said, well, let me take a look at that, let me see if I can help you, trading desk. HR had a problem. Well, all right, let me take a look at that, maybe I can help you. So I just kind of filled the cracks where I noticed there were cracks. Next thing you know, I was basically the chief operating officer without the title. And then a few years later, they eventually gave me the title. But it's something that I think people can take away here is just don't stay static in what you're doing. Take a look around you at what's going on.
Initiative. You're taking initiative.
Yeah. So I saw an opportunity. I saw something that had to get done. Nobody was doing it, so I did it. Did it again. Did it again. Did it again. And eventually, they just gave me the title for the job I was doing.
It's a very important lesson, and because we have so many successful alumni hearing this story over and over again. I'm just thinking about Gil Goldstein, who is the largest executive. He's not large. He's got the biggest enterprise in reality television. Mm-hmm. And he came, a fairly recent graduate from this school, didn't know anything about it, but just made himself useful, and eventually became the COO, from being the only general counsel, and then CEO. Yeah, exactly. So then you go from RCM to Sonnen. Talk about that transition and any differences in the nature of the work and the focus.
Yeah, very different. So I was at RCM for 16 years. In 2010, as you mentioned, I was elevated to the CEO. So what happened was RCM was acquired twice. First time by Dresdner Bank, and then Dresdner Bank was acquired by a very large German insurance company called Allianz, one of the largest insurance companies in the world, and they had an asset management division. They owned PIMCO, and they owned 5 other equity. We were predominantly an equity shop, RCM, and they owned 5 other equity businesses in the U.S. New CEO comes on board at the Allianz level, takes a look around at the portfolio of investment managers, and they decide to merge all the equity businesses. They let PIMCO alone, and they merged all the equity businesses and decided to move everybody to New York, the headquarters. So I didn't want to do that. I'd already been there, done that. I was in San Francisco. So I took some time off. And I remember very clearly one day, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, what's next for me? I got to do something next. I stayed around for about 6 months to transition my role, and I took some time off, and what next? And my friend said, Bob, why don't you go do something special? Why don't you go do something and have an impact on the world? And I had never heard of impact investing, by the way. Didn't exist in my world. He goes, go do something and make an impact. And I thought, well, I'd like to do that, but how do I do that? I'm a lawyer, and I basically know finance. How the heck do I make an impact with that background? And sure enough, a few months later, through a connection, I get a call from the founder of this relatively new company called Sonnen Capital, and said, through a mutual acquaintance, I know about you. We're looking for somebody that can run this little business, 3-year-old business. Went in, spoke to them over the course of 3 months, an entire summer, and got to know a small firm, got to know them, and just, first of all, thought they were some of the smartest people I ever met, which was immediately an attraction, because I always like to work with people that are smarter than me. I try not to be the smartest. If you're the smartest person in the world, you're in the wrong room, from my perspective. And these guys were incredibly smart, and I thought they were doing really cool work. And they weren't giving money away. They were there to make money, and that's my background, right? My background is investing to make money, but they were doing it in a way that I had never heard of before. They were doing it in a way to make social and environmental positive impact while making money at the same time. And it just became
Does one of those goals trump the other, or are
No.
they both in tandem?
It depends. First of all, no, one doesn't trump the other, and it really depends on your client. Some clients are focused on the environment, some clients are focused on social issues, and some clients are focused on both. So we can do mix.
How do you measure your progress towards those goals? So on the business side, I think we're pretty familiar with what benchmarks are, and we can intuitively understand that. But on the environmental impact side, how do you measure the impact?
Sure, you could talk about, the easiest way is the production of megawatts of renewable energy and displacement of fossil fuel, megawatts that are produced by dirty energy, let's call it, or non-renewable energy. So you can go in the emerging world, it's very easy. You can take a look at those that don't have any electricity, right? And now all of a sudden you're able to bring in a microgrid with a wind farm or solar panels. Now how many people have access to electricity that didn't have access to electricity? Pretty easy to measure that. And also displacement of megawatts or fossil fuel generated energy, and now how that's been displaced by renewable energy.
That's interesting, because some of those metrics are baked into the regulatory framework that was imposed for clean air or energy production, where you could trade credits. If one entity is more efficient, they could get a benefit and trade it to others. So that's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
You're not looking and saying, well, the temperature of the Earth dropped 1 degree. You're not taking that kind of a long term. You're actually tangibly looking at what measurably the entities that you are investing in are doing.
Yes, but what you said 2 seconds before that we also focus on. So for example, I assume most of you are familiar with COP21 or the Paris Accord that we just pulled out of. But what came out of COP21 was investing based on science-based targets. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with this, the UN, all 196 members of the UN signed on to this. And the idea is to prevent the Earth from warming more than 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial times. And they say if the Earth warms more than 2 degrees from pre-industrial times, we're at the point of no return. And so the COP21 was 196 countries got together and agreed, now it's non-binding, but agreed that they were going to eliminate all forms of fossil fuel energy by 2050. Now, interestingly enough, there's a group that we work with where we can measure the carbon footprint of our portfolios. And you could take a look at the science-based targets, and there's a line that shows you how much carbon reduction has to be made by 2050 to prevent from reaching that 2 degrees Celsius. And we can map our portfolio along that line graph. And if the line's this, and all of a sudden we're here, we say, oh no, we're heading in the wrong direction. So our portfolios need to stay below that line in order to continue progress towards that staying under 2 degrees Celsius.
Well, that's fascinating, because you're not only tangibly measuring what you assume is a positive impact, but you're measuring what contribution you're having to a much larger goal, which is very inspiring and motivating and also, but how is that good for business? Can you make that connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So, people, renewable energy, for years was were for people that were hardcore environmentalists, and it was more expensive to produce, it was more expensive to deliver. Fossil fuel is cheap, relatively cheap. There was no reason to do it. So what we're seeing now is, first of all, a technology revolution. So we're now in the midst of a technology revolution, and a lot of that is happening in the climate change space, and it's happening in the environmental space. And so what we're seeing is a lot of companies, especially those that are big users of electricity. I was talking to Dana earlier. Take a Microsoft, for example, have massive data farms, or an Amazon has massive data farms. You know how much power they use every day? It's massive. And the cost of their power is variable, because you don't know what's the cost of energy. What is the price of oil going to do? What is the price of coal going to do? You don't know. You can buy forwards and the like and try to hedge it. But once you put in renewable energy and you buy power purchase agreements that go out 20, 30 years, you know exactly what your cost of energy is going to be, and you can manage your company in a much more efficient way. And for the most part, solar and wind have hit grid parity now with fossil fuel-based energy. So it's not more expensive, and the grids are there. So it makes, in order for this to really catch on, it has to make sense from an economic and financial perspective. If it doesn't, it's not going to catch on. There's no way around it, but it is.
When are we going to get to the point where we don't need tax credits or tax support for these alternative technologies?
They're starting to roll off now. And I do think, again, they've hit grid parity, and as the technology becomes more and more efficient and more available, those credits won't be necessary, and I don't think it's far down the road. And we're investing in solar and wind right now without credits, because we take a look at, we model it long term, and we see the profit there without the credits.
Okay, so before we turn this over, which I want to, I've got two very short questions, one serious question, and a catch-all. So the two short questions. Question number one, on terms of the progress toward or away from the 2 degrees Celsius, where are we? Are we at 1 degree, a half a degree?
The answer is, I don't know, is the honest answer. So it's 2 degrees Celsius, so what COP21 came out with is 1.5. They gave themselves a buffer. They said, so they're trying to they don't want to breach 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to do that, you need to be completely carbon-free by 2050. Now, COP21 happened in December 2015, and it's not binding. So I don't think there's information out there yet. I haven't seen it. Let's put it that way.
But we're not at 0. We're at 1. We're between 1 and 2. What do you think we are?
Oh, if we're at 1 or 1 and 2, we're dead. We're not going to make it. So I think we're at about a half degree, about a half, 3/4 of a degree.
All right.
there.
So here's my follow-up question, and this is selfish because this is just something that bothers me. What's the temperature of the world? When you say that the temperature of the world has increased, what does that mean?
Well, it basically means that the average temperature of the world is increased over time, and it's basically from pre-industrial times, however you want to define it. We're probably already, like I said, 3/4 of a degree warmer.
But so what it is you take every little pinpoint around the world somehow, globally, and find out at any moment, or is it averaged over a year, what the temperature is, and then you average the entire Earth? And then how do we know what it was in pre-industrial times, where maybe even now we have the technology to do that? I'm just, by the way, I'm a climate change, I'm not a doubter. I'm just trying to figure this out.
Well, I don't think there's much of a debate, and maybe we can talk about that. I don't think there's much of a debate that the Earth is warming. The debates
I agree.
The debate is around, is it man-made? Okay, right? So you could take a look at the glaciers. You could take a look at many different data points. I don't think there's a debate about the Earth is warming. The debate's about, is it man-made? Are we causing it to warm? Okay. Now, in terms of measuring it, there's smarter people and scientists than me.
Okay.
You know.
Well, we won't get bogged down in that, but no, I agree we're warming. I believe the evidence supports that, and I believe that the evidence is irrefutable that it's man-made. I'm just curious, because it kind of can't get my head around, how do you figure out what the temperature
I'll
of
look
the
it up and
world-
send you an email.
A short one.
Yeah. It'll just be in the radar.
I'm sorry for taking your time on that selfish question, and that was not on the list, so.
It wasn't.
It was not on the list. Okay, so here's something I think that you have some insights about, and I really want to ask this question because Hans and I know Kara was here, people who are in my class, government advocacy class, we're just talking about this. What is the appropriate role and relationship between government and corporations in pursuing both business and social impact objectives?
Right. So importantly, we need both. The government alone isn't going to get the job done for a variety of reasons. One is monetary. Just don't have it's going to take trillions of dollars, actually trillions of dollars spent a year for the next 15, 20 years in order to prevent ourselves from getting to the point of no return. So you got a problem with government A not either having enough money and B just gridlock and not being able to make decisions. Having said that, they can also create regulations and they can create pathways to make it easier for this to happen. So you do need their help, it's just painful. But it's still not enough money coming from them. What you need is private money, private enterprise money. We have, for example, the country of Denmark have basically said they're going to be completely carbon-free by 2025, I believe. Norway, which has the largest pension fund in the world, has basically allocated, at the moment, 25%, and that's going to climb significantly higher to invest in renewable energy. So you've got public-private that has to happen in order for us to get to the point where we need to get to.
I would have thought also that, and maybe you agree or disagree with this, that the unique role of government is to midwife and shepherd accommodations between competing legitimate interests, making trade-offs. I mean, people can't necessarily do that on themselves in the open market. The government kind of helps.
That's true. And when you say government, let's make sure we understand what we mean by government. Are we talking about the federal government? Are we talking about state level? Are we talking about municipal level? So what's happening, we all know what's happening at the federal level.
But you're focusing on the states now, too, isn't it?
Well, take a look at California.
Right.
Many other states are following along. Trump said when he was pulling out of COP21, he represents Pittsburgh. He doesn't represent Norwell. Well, it turns out the mayor of Pittsburgh and the governor of Pennsylvania said, well, I don't, we're using
clean.
sustainable energy. So, Governor Brown in California says, I don't care what Washington says. We're going clean. So, regardless of what happens at the federal level, and of course the federal level can be very helpful, there's grassroots movements at the state and municipal level as well, and that's very helpful.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give Professor Dana Brockman-Reeser the first honor, the first question, but since I tore up the questions, was there anything I missed that you really particularly feel is important to ask you, that you're just dying to say?
Well, you were going to ask me the type of investments we're making.
Okay.
I don't have to answer it,
No,
but I'm
okay.
happy
We
to.
all want to know. In fact, we all want to then have 2 minutes to make phone calls.
Yeah. It might
Bye.
be interesting to give a couple examples of this type of work we do to kind of maybe bring this home and make it more tangible for people to understand. Right now, we're in the middle of diligencing, in fact, livestock farms in Australia. People may or may not realize that about 15 to 16% of carbon and methane in the atmosphere, it's carbon and methane in the atmosphere, come from livestock. And there were arguments that livestock actually wasn't indigenous to Australia. It was brought over by the Europeans. They didn't have ungulates there that tear up the earth and the soil, and we have all these internal debates whether or not we should be doing that because basically we came to the conclusion, look, livestock's there to stay. It's not going anywhere. And we found several livestock breeders that have developed very innovative ways to raise livestock in a sustainable way. So, it's grass-fed. So, over 50, 60% of all food grown in America is grown to feed livestock. Okay, and so when you're growing things, when you're tilling the earth, you're releasing carbon. Okay, the earth itself is very good at carbon sequestration. But as soon as you start tilling that earth, that carbon gets released.
And also to provide high yield feed, you're putting all the pesticides and herbicides in the ground that then has runoff, and then it's problematic. It's a mess.
It's a mess. So we found these people in Australia that have innovative ways of raising livestock. Meat's here to stay. We're not going to tell people you can't eat meat because it's bad for the environment. That's just not realistic. So let's find a better way of raising that cattle and creating that meat in a way that is sustainable. So that's something we're looking at as an example. We have invested in a company that's developing hydro, geothermal, and wind farms in sub-Saharan Africa, and delivering and building what we call microgrids. A problem years ago was, well, yeah, you can develop all this clean energy through these wind farms and solar and geothermal, but how are you going to deliver it to people? You can't get it to the grid. Well, now they're just leapfrogging. It's called leapfrogging. Forget the grid. We don't need a grid. We'll build our own little grid. There's a little community here. We set up thermal, we set up solar, and we build a local grid for the community.
What'd you call it? Defrogging?
Leapfrogging.
Oh, leapfrogging.
So they're leapfrogging in telephone, for example, communications. No more they didn't have landlines. What's the point of building landlines at this point? You just leapfrog the landlines. It goes straight to cellular and satellite. In fact, if you go to most of Africa has better connectivity than probably right here.
So less gaseous cows, leapfrogging, what else?
Well, that's a lot right there.
All right, we're impressed. That's great.
But that's on the environmental side. There's social issues, but
Okay.
we can keep
We'll
going.
leave
but
it there.
I'll
That's plenty. I mean, that's accomplishing a lot. Professor Brockman-Reiser.
Thank you. So thank you so much. So interesting to hear you talk today. You just were talking a little bit about the types of investments that Sonnen is engaged in. I wondered if you could tell us about the types of investors that have an appetite for this kind of investment in their portfolio.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, because that's really important. Historically, this space was the space of what I would call wealthy people, high net worth individuals, family offices, and the like. Family foundations that are doing what they're taking the corpus of their portfolio and mission aligning it. And that was great, and it got it started. But in order for this to really take off and get the capital flowing into the space that we really needed, we need to what I call democratize the space. And democratizing the space means that the people in this room can invest as little or as much as you have to invest in this space. And
Crowdfunding?
So, I'm not a big fan of crowdfunding for this, because at the end of the day, again, we're here to make money, right? And so who's doing the diligence? Who's saying that this is a good investment to make in a crowdfunding? I'm not really sure. So we consider ourselves first and foremost really good investors. So when I hire somebody, for example, the first thing I want to know, are you an exceptional investor? If you're not an exceptional investor, I don't care what your views of the world are or how your values are aligned, I'm not interested. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of crowdfunding for the impact space. But in terms of answering your question, Dana, it was high net worth individuals, people that had family foundations and the like, that wanted to align their values with their capital. It's becoming more democratized as we speak. As I think I mentioned earlier to you, 9 of the 10 largest money managers in the world now have impact departments, and they're starting to create what I call retail products that are accessible for the retail client. And there's some robo-advisors that are now coming out, more ESG integration, less impact, but nonetheless important. So the idea is to get it from the wealthy and democratize it and get it and make it available to the retail audience, to the typical people walking around the streets here.
Right. Dean, do you have a question?
I do, but I don't want to.
Go ahead, quick.
So again, thank you for coming. Really interesting to hear from an actual impact investor. Dana and I have been working on this book, but we're here in the ivory tower, not really getting a feel for what's happening in the real world. It's very interesting. One question I had for you, and I don't want to have you share all your state secrets, but do you find that we're talking a little about the metrics you use in your investments? Do those metrics for what kind of environmental impact you're having or social impact, do those get baked into the terms of the deal, or are they just taken into consideration as you evaluate, as you diligence a deal? That's, I guess, what I would be most curious about.
Right. So very important. As I said, we're investors. Okay, so we have a research department, and we have within our research department what I call traditional analysts that are looking at the financial metrics of an investment, and then we have impact analysts that are looking at the impact metrics of an investment. And those need to come together. So I'm on our we have an investment committee. No investment gets made until the investment committee gives the thumbs up. So what happens is the financial analysts and the impact analysts come together, and we talk about an investment. What's important in what you asked is that when we look at an investment, it has to be financially viable, and it has to have the degree of impact that we're looking for. And we won't make an investment unless both are present. And we set that up front. There needs to be, what's important, there needs to be what we call intentionality by the investee. Okay? So they're doing this because their intention is to create some social or environmental impact. There are people out there that are doing things that are having a positive environmental impact, but they're doing it because it makes financial sense. That's great. But the next thing may come along that also makes financial sense that is actually not good for the environment. And they may swing in that direction because that makes financial sense. We don't like that. So there has to be intentionality. The reason they're doing this is because they're intentionally seeking some sort of social and environmental impact outcome. So up front, we actually set up, before we invest, we create a document with what we call KPIs, key performance indicators, and we measure and we set out up front, okay, these are the metrics upon which we're going to measure you on. These are the metrics upon which you need to report on a quarterly basis, and that's how we're going to judge your performance, both financially and from whatever impact we're seeking from that particular investment. So it's dual track, dual path.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, yes.
Just to kind of segue on your mention of KPIs. So what kind of social indicators do you look for when you're looking at the metrics for social impact?
It could be anything from how many people now have access to education, how many people have access to healthcare, how many people have access to clean water, how many people have access to housing, the typical things that you can think of. We tend to focus on education, healthcare, clean water. But you can measure that, and you could talk about, again, setting up front, how many housing units are you planning to develop so that people can have housing and roofs over their heads? And we can set that up front to make sure that that's what we're investing in and that's what we get.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Since every investor is looking for a return, is it easy to find someone like a big company that's going to actually make a profit from these initiatives? Or is it difficult to actually find a way for them to generate profit?
Yeah, there are, it really depends on the sector you're looking at and the sort of impact you're seeking. Okay, so some are easier than others. In the climate change world, there's lots of stuff out there that you can look at. Not all of it are what we call investable, meaning we don't think their financial model is good. But there's lots out there. There's a ton of stuff going on. Clean technology, for example. All right, there's a ton of stuff going on there. Social space is different. There are opportunities out there, but to find a financial model where you think that's going to be profitable takes a little bit more work, takes a little bit more digging, and a little bit more diligence. And especially if you're working in the developing world as opposed to the developed world, you got to take into, currency fluctuations are important, macro events are important to predict, and the skill of the people on the ground in the developing world, you have to take a hard look at and making sure that you believe they can deliver what they want. So I'd say on the environmental side, the opportunities are greater. We can find them. On the social side, they exist, but they're harder to find, and we spend more time diligencing those.
All the way in the back, sure. behind Rudikoff. We'll let the student have the first question.
Thank you. You spoke about the different type of investors that you're looking for. How are you guys changing your strategy as far as raising capital for this particular type of impact investing as opposed to traditional, I guess, asset allocation type of strategy would be?
So just so I understand, in terms of how do we find clients, would that be a way
For
of
this
putting it?
particular fund, right, that you're
Correct.
speaking about, outside of the top 10 or so investment funds that are banding together to make this
Right.
like a public policy type situation.
So we have our own funds, okay, and so we've developed our own strategy, our own products, our own funds. The bulk of our clients are the type of organizations and people I've already described. But we're also working now with, not only do we invest, we also educate. So we're working with, for example, a very large foundation here in New York City, for example, where the board has decided that they want to mission align their portfolio. So you have the grant-making side of a foundation, and then you have the people that invest the endowment of the foundation. And they've decided they want to mission align. So that means investing the corpus of the foundation in a similar fashion as their grant-making. So we're actually helping the board think through this and how to do it in a profitable way, how to do it and what's the method for doing it. And so that's a way to get your foot in the door of a large foundation. And then once one foundation does it successfully, you'll find that others follow suit. It's a very cliquey group, by the way. These foundations tend to all follow each other, and they belong to the same affinity groups and the like. You go to conferences, and you see all the same people. So the idea is to kind of spread the word and start working, doing it successfully, and by word of mouth. We unfortunately don't have what I call strategies and products that help democratize the space, what I call retail strategies. I kind of think of that as the holy grail, but we as a firm are not there yet. I can't compete with Goldman Sachs on that at this point.
So we've got John Rudikoff, he's the executive director of the Center for Urban Business Entrepreneurship, and he has too good a tan, really, to be here.
Hey.
Go ahead, John.
Well, thanks for being here today. I really want to ask you about the LEED certification system for for real estate development and for measuring that impact. What existing models or certification systems are there for assessing social impact that you rely on today, and what would be useful in the future to help expand retail opportunity around social impact
Sure.
investment?
So there is no such thing on the social side as LEED certification. By the way, we don't pay attention to LEED certification. It's great that someone can put on their building that they're gold or platinum LEED certified. Fine, great, but that's not what we look at. But there isn't the equivalent on the social side. And the problem is at this point, well, first of all, there's so many different social areas and social issues. There isn't any single one, and it's fairly nascent. So, and the other thing that I was talking to Dana about earlier is one of the issues that we have in this space is the taxonomy and the nomenclature, because people will use the same word but mean different things. And so I think one of the most important things is, before we even get the equivalent of a LEED type certification on the social side, is making sure that the taxonomy and the nomenclature and how we're speaking about these things is common across all areas, so that if I'm talking to you or somebody else, we're actually on the same page. I think that's more important before we even get to the point of certification.
Anybody else? So, Bob, we heard how you got involved in this field, but how does somebody who's just getting out of law school get involved in this field?
Well, first of all, there are law firms that focus on this. Morrison & Foster, by the way, has a fantastic impact practice based out in San Francisco. And I'm sure there are other law firms. We use Arnold & Porter a lot. They have a group that focuses on impact work, where their clients are, for instance, our type of organization. There are law firms that work with social entrepreneurs and help set up those types of organizations or seek funding. So I would think that's one way of doing it, looking for law firms that actually have these sorts of practices. I mean, there are a ton of practices, as you're aware, environmental practices within law firms. So if you wanted to go the legal route, that's a way of doing it. The non-legal route is probably a little bit more difficult, probably a less as a linear direction into it. There are plenty of organizations that are doing it. Outside of going to all the major financial institutions are now doing this, but foundation work. Most foundations, especially family foundations, it's starting to, the Ford Foundation, for example, the second largest foundation in the world after the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has just dedicated $1 billion to impact investing. Bill and Melinda Gates is doing a ton of this already. So take a look at foundation work as well. It's easy enough. All foundations' financials are public. You look up their 990s, and you can see what they're doing and what they're investing in. So I would say the easiest way is through foundation work as well, and they tend to be on the leading edge of this.
So, what do you do for fun? You seem a pretty balanced guy. You've got a wonderful family, 2 terrific kids, one who's not here in Dartmouth, the other was not too long ago at Dartmouth.
I am a golfer, so I do that. This year, for some crazy reason, we planted a massive garden in our backyard, so we've had to manage that.
Are you eating what you grow?
Beyond eating what we grow, we're selling what we grow at this point. We have so much.
You just can't help but make money. It's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
exactly.
It's got the golden touch.
Probably do what everybody else does. There's recreation. There's unfortunately, I'm reading less these days. I think that's the one negative thing about having all these smartphones, because there's so much data that hits you. But just follow sports, golf, and family life. I wish I could say something more exciting, but
there's method to my madness. That very important question on people's minds is, how do you have a life and have a career? And all different types of people. So it's kind of useful to know that you've always made time, you're enthusiastic, you work hard, but it's possible. But you don't have any particular plan or secret agenda. You just make time for things that you're interested in.
Yeah, it was harder when I was younger, when I was working for Dennis Block, for example.
I'll remind him that tomorrow.
That was really hard to find time. Honestly, it was one of the reasons why I did go in-house, was for a little bit better work-life balance.
You have more control over your schedule.
Exactly. But I would say the training, I wouldn't give it up. I'm glad I did it. That 6 years of just working extremely hard and not necessarily having that work-life balance. But the training was excellent. But I did move in-house for a little bit better work-life balance.
So you're not only a great lawyer and a general counsel experience, but you're a consumer of lawyers and legal services. When you hire outside counsel, what are you looking for?
Again, someone that's smarter than me. Very important. Someone that knows what they're doing, that has the answers. Cost. As you know, top law firms they charge a premium. But very interestingly, we have gone to the major law firms, and because of what we do, and they want to support what we do, we always get a discount from their rack rate. And I find that very encouraging. I can pick up the phone and call Davis Polk. I can call Arnold and Porter and tell them I need help on this, and this is what we do. And they have kind of an eleemosynary policy. We'll get a discount. But what I'm looking for is basically capability and know-how, first and foremost. Cost is important, but if they can't get the job done, then it's no point.
So I'm tempted to ask you if you had 3 things for people to keep in mind to be successful and fulfilled in their life as they're going through looking forward. What would those 3 things to do? But I don't want to put you on the spot with Jessica here. Maybe I'll just ask Jessica, what has he been telling you? If you want to answer, but either you or she can answer.
Well, I do tell her. You got to do something you enjoy doing and that you have a passion for. Don't chase money. If you're good and you're successful, hopefully that comes along if that's important to you. For some, it's not important. For others, it is. But if you're not happy with what you're doing, there's no point. and eventually you won't be successful if you're not happy with what you're doing. So it may, we were talking about it earlier actually this morning at breakfast, and it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. If you're not happy with what you're doing, if you don't have a passion for what you're doing, go find something else and do it. And work hard, stay focused, and find some balance in your life. Because if you're not happy because you don't like what you're doing and you don't have the proper balance in your life, you're probably not going to be successful either. So simple, cliche, probably you've heard this from everybody, but find your passion, enjoy what you do, and find time outside of work to clear your mind.
You know, I didn't quite expect this, but we not only have had a wonderfully insightful, informative, and groundbreaking discussion, conversation, but we've discovered something about you is that you're incredibly cool and you're normal, which is not necessarily a
one's ever
common
said that.
combination. So I think we're going to, in a moment, break, and you'll have an opportunity, maybe some of you, to approach Bob personally for a few minutes. But let me just say that a couple things. One is, and I don't know if you know this, but recently the New York Law Journal, which is one of the more staid publications, rated Brooklyn Law School as the second best overall law school in New York. NYU was
Congratulations.
the first. Better than a poke in the eye. But so we got some work to do, but our alumni are second to none, and you're certainly an example of that. And we're really, really grateful for having you here. I think that just hearing you talk about the decisions you made in your career and how you approached your career throughout all the different stages and then also your life's work was extremely useful for our students to hear and to help them as they consider making their own choices. And I think that being able to hear you are at the cutting edge of this new field of impact investing, which is great and uplifting, because you don't have to make this false choice of doing well and doing good. You can combine the two. It's just wonderful. So we're very grateful. I'm going to ask everybody to give you a big round of applause for being with us and sharing your thoughts. Thank you.
I want to say one thing. The Holy Grail, by the way, is in 10 or 15 years for me not to be here. And the reason for that is we want investing the way we invest just to become the way people invest. And it's not going to have a different name. Right? So hopefully in 10 years you won't have people like me here because it'll just be standard and just the way things are happening.
As your attorney, I'm going to advise you to recharacterize that and say not to be here. We have other things in mind for you, but I get the drift. And now this is incredibly important. What you're talking about and what Dana and Steve have been writing about. Millennials are different. I found out this year that not a single one has ever heard of Perry Mason, which is unfathomable to me. It's unfathomable. And also, they like to take pictures of their food. What's that all about? But one thing they have in common is they really, I believe, want to make a difference and have an impact. And what you have been revealing to them is that you can have a wonderfully productive, successful career in a business and financial area and make a big positive impact. So thank you for that. We've got some bling for you. I've got you a copy.
Hot off the press?
How about the hot off? It's so hot I can barely hold it here. And I'm sure, boy, they're moving so fast also. Right? So this is one of the remaining copies that's on the shelves of bookstores, but I'm sure that you can get the authors to sign that for you. And we have some other typical Brooklyn bling here for you. Yeah, you got the A bling here, so this is pretty good. So there you go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Thanks
thanks.
everybody for willing to hear me out.